She thought she was buying a mistake, a crumbling old movie theater for $500, a relic no one wanted. But the night Clara Reese stepped inside, the air changed. Dust drifted through the beam of her flashlight like ghosts returning to the stage. The seats were torn, the screen shredded, yet something hummed deep within the walls. Then she found it. A locked projector room sealed with rust and initials carved in iron, J.R. What she didn't know was that behind that door waited a secret buried for 70 years and $60 million in gold. After years of silence and small humiliations, it ended with the scratch of a pen. Clara Reese sat across from her ex-husband in the echoing courthouse, a man she once believed would stand beside her forever. The clerk's voice was flat, procedural, cold. "You're free to go." Free, such an empty word. It felt less like release and more like being pushed off a cliff. She gathered the papers, her fingers trembling as though the ink itself carried the weight of every broken promise. Outside, autumn leaves swirled across the courthouse steps, the wind cutting through her coat like glass. She stood for a long moment beneath the gray sky, watching cars drift past. None slowed for her. No one noticed the woman whose world had just quietly collapsed. For years, Clara had measured her worth by what she could hold together: the house, the family, the image of control. But now, all she owned was a beat-up sedan, a storage unit full of furniture she couldn't sell, and the restless fear that her teenage son was starting to look at her the way she looked at herself, lost, ashamed, unfinished. She drove home without turning on the radio. Silence filled the car like fog. Every red light reflected in her tired eyes small flashes of warning she had ignored for too long. The town itself looked worn out, like it had stopped dreaming decades ago. Storefronts boarded up, paint peeling from the diner sign. A place that once glittered with possibility now barely kept its lights on. She understood it too well. When she parked outside her tiny rental, she sat for several minutes before going in. Inside, boxes were stacked against walls she still hadn't decorated. Her son, Ethan, sat at the table doing homework or pretending to. He looked up, reading her face before she said a word. "It's done?" he asked quietly. Clara nodded. "Yeah, it's done." Neither spoke after that. The fridge hummed. A clock ticked. The space between them was filled with all the words they didn't know how to say. Later that night, when Ethan went to bed, Clara sat alone in the kitchen with a cup of cold coffee and a list of unpaid bills. Rent, utilities, car insurance, all pressing in like a noose tightening. She could feel herself sinking into that familiar panic, the kind that whispers, "There's no way out." But life, even in its cruelest moments, has strange ways of throwing you a lifeline disguised as madness. The next morning, while scanning local ads for jobs and auctions, anything, really she saw it. Old Liberty Theater City Auction, starting bid $500. A photo sat beside the listing, a faded building with Art Deco curves and cracked glass doors. Its marquee hanging crookedly, letters missing like teeth. Most would scroll past it. But something about that image stopped her. There was a loneliness in it, a kind of quiet defiance that mirrored her own. By noon, she was sitting in a folding chair inside the county hall, surrounded by antique dealers and local contractors. The smell of dust and paper filled the room. When the auctioneer called out, "Lot 12, Liberty Theater starting at $500, no one raised a hand. The silence stretched, and then, impulsively, foolishly, she lifted hers. The auctioneer barely blinked. Going once, twice, a pause, sold, a gavel struck. The sound was final, like a judge's verdict. People turned to see who had bought the ruin. A few smirked, a few whispered. But Clara felt a strange surge of warmth spread through her chest, the first flicker of something she hadn't felt in months, possibility. That night, she drove out to see her purchase. The road was narrow and cracked, lined with leafless trees. The building stood at the edge of town like an old monument to forgotten dreams. The once bright marquee read only Lib. Why? The rest lost to time. She parked and stepped out. The air smelled of rain and rust. The front doors resisted at first, then groaned open with a sigh, like the theater itself was exhaling after decades of silence. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint sweetness of old popcorn oil. Rows of torn velvet seats faced a tattered screen hanging like a ghost of its past glory. Sunlight filtered through broken windows, painting long streaks of gold across the faded carpet. It was beautiful in its own broken way, a palace of decay and memory. Clara walked slowly down the aisle, her footsteps echoing off the cracked walls. She could almost hear faint applause, laughter, the hum of projectors long gone cold. She ran her hand along the back of a seat, feeling the fabric crumble beneath her fingertips. For a moment, she forgot her failures. She forgot the divorce papers and the bills. All that existed was this relic, this quiet place waiting for someone to care again. On stage, she found an old microphone still attached to its stand. Dust motes drifted through a shaft of light like slow, falling snow. She smiled faintly and whispered, "Well, Liberty looks like it's you and me now." As she explored further, the air grew colder. The hallways behind the stage twisted like veins, narrow, dim, and lined with peeling posters from the 1950s. Casablanca, Singin' in the Rain, faces of stars long gone, still smiling as if unaware of their own fading. At the far end of the hall, she noticed a narrow staircase leading up to a locked door. Its paint was blistered, its handle sealed with rust. She tugged gently, nothing. Then she saw it, faintly carved into the metal above the handle J. Ah, she frowned, tracing the letters with her fingertip. They felt deliberate, almost ceremonial. Somewhere in the building, a loose shutter banged against the wind, echoing like a heartbeat. The theater seemed to breathe around her, its silence heavy with secrets. She turned off her flashlight and stood in the dark, listening. The rain began to fall outside, soft at first, then harder. It pattered against the roof like a rhythm, slow, steady, insistent. And in that darkness, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years, not fear, but curiosity. Whatever this place had been, whatever story it still held, she could sense it waiting patient and buried behind that door. As the thunder rolled across the empty sky, she smiled faintly through the gloom. Maybe, just maybe, this broken theater was the second chance she didn't know she was looking for. And somewhere deep inside the walls, unseen by her, a light flickered, a faint pulse from the old projector room, as if waking from a very long sleep. As the night deepened, Clara realized the story was only beginning. The next morning arrived draped in fog, the kind that made the world look half dream, half memory. Clara barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that locked door, those letters carved into the metal. J. Ah, they lingered in her mind like a whisper she couldn't quite catch. She made coffee in a chipped mug, staring at the steam as if it might spell out a plan. Ethan shuffled into the kitchen, backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder. He glanced at her, then at the stack of property papers on the table. "You're really doing this?" he asked, his tone caught between disbelief and worry. "I already did," she said with a small smile. "It's ours now. Ours." He raised a brow. "Mom, that place looks like it should be condemned." "Maybe," she admitted softly, But it's something, and something is better than nothing. He sighed, nodding in reluctant acceptance before heading out the door. When it closed behind him, the silence returned heavier now, but not as suffocating as before. Clara, dressed in old jeans and a sweatshirt, grabbed her keys and drove toward the theater. The morning mist clung to the windshield like a veil. As she turned onto Main Street, the decaying grandeur of the Liberty appeared through the haze, stubborn, haunting, magnificent. Inside, the air greeted her like a memory left on pause. The same stillness, the same faint echo of forgotten laughter. She carried a toolbox this time, determined to start somewhere, anywhere. The first hours passed in quiet rhythm. She swept dust into piles, gathered scattered film reels, and wiped grime from the faded ticket booth window. Each movement felt almost sacred, as if she were tending to the ghost of someone who had waited too long for company. In the manager's office, she found ledgers coated in dust, pages yellowed and curling. Receipts dated back to 1953. Ticket sales, popcorn orders, maintenance requests, each one a fragment of a life long gone. On one page, written in an elegant hand, she saw a note. Premiere night. Operation Dawnlight invite only. She frowned. Operation Dawnlight, the name pulsed in her head, unfamiliar yet oddly weighted. She turned the page, it ended there. No details, no follow-up entries after that night. The rest of the ledger was blank. A chill ran up her spine. The theater had died suddenly, like someone had pulled its heartbeat out mid-show. Hours later, she stood at the center of the auditorium, looking up at the ceiling's peeling murals, celestial figures painted in faded blues and golds. They once shimmered under the glow of the chandeliers, she imagined, but now looked like saints caught in limbo. Sunlight cut through a crack in the boarded door, slicing the darkness into golden dust motes. She turned slowly, following the beam until it landed on the projection booth high above the seats. The stairs creaked as she climbed, the metal railing cold beneath her hand. When she reached the booth, the smell of old celluloid hit her sharp, chemical, intoxicating. The projector sat like a fossil, its lenses clouded, reels tangled in cobwebs. She brushed them away gently, feeling the rough edges of the machine beneath her fingertips. A label near the base read, Rains & Co. Cinema Systems, the name struck her again. Rains. She had seen it carved below those same initials, J.R. Her heart began to pound, slow but heavy. She leaned closer, peering through the lens. Dust drifted inside like tiny galaxies. She reached for the switch instinctively, though she knew the power was long gone. Still, the motion felt right, like testing, if the past could breathe again. A bird fluttered from the rafters, startling her. She laughed quietly to herself, shaking off the nerves. "You scared me," she whispered into the emptiness. That's when she noticed a faint outline on the far wall, rectangular, just slightly darker than the rest. She ran her hand over it. It sounded hollow. She tapped once, then again. The echo was unmistakable. There was space behind it. Clara crouched, tracing the wall's edge with her fingers until she found a seam no thicker than a thread. Her pulse quickened. The locked door, the initials, the ledger's last entry, it all pointed here. She stepped back, trying to collect herself. This was supposed to be a renovation project, not a mystery. Yet the theater had a way of pulling her deeper, layer by layer, into its silence. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. The weather was turning. She looked down from the booth window. The seats below sat in their endless rows, silent witnesses to whatever had happened here decades ago. A thought drifted through her mind like smoke. What if something terrible happened during that premiere? What if the door wasn't locked to keep people out, But to keep something in, she laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're losing it, Clara." Still, she couldn't shake the sense of presence, as though the building was listening. By late afternoon, she stepped outside to breathe. The sun was setting, painting the clouds in amber and ash. Across the street, an old man stood watching her from a bench. His posture was stiff, his hat pulled low. She lifted a hand in greeting, but he turned away. When she glanced back at the theater, its cracked marquee glowed faintly in the dying light. The word Liberty caught the last shimmer of the sun, casting a golden reflection across her car. It felt like an omen, one she couldn't yet name. That night, at home, Clara lay awake in bed, listening to the rain. Every creak of the old house reminded her of the theater's breath, the echo of its heartbeat through the walls. Sleep refused to come. Her mind replayed every strange detail, the carved initials, the hollow wall, the empty ledger pages. Finally, she rose quietly, made tea, and sat by the window. Outside, lightning split the clouds for a moment, bathing the town in white light. And in that flash, she saw it clearly in her imagination, the Liberty Theatre alive again. Its marquee blazing, the crowd gathered for Operation Dawnlight, cameras flashing, then darkness, silence, vanishing from history. Her chest tightened. The story was hiding there, waiting. Maybe it wasn't gold or treasure she was chasing. Maybe it was truth. She didn't yet understand that the two would soon become the same thing. When dawn came, she packed a notebook, flashlight, and crowbar into her car. She didn't tell Ethan where she was going, because she already knew what she had to do next. She had to open that door. As the morning light bled across the horizon, Clara drove toward the Liberty, her heart steady now, not from peace, but from purpose. The story she had stumbled into was much older, much darker, and far more valuable than she could imagine. And somewhere inside that decaying theater, something was waiting, listening, ready to be found. As the engine hummed and the building's silhouette came into view, a single thought echoed in her mind like a vow: whatever's behind that wall, I'm going to find it. And with that, the Liberty Theatre awakened to its new keeper, a woman with nothing left to lose, and everything left to discover. As the day began, the dust of the past stirred once more. The story was far from over. Morning sunlight spilled through the clouds like liquid gold as Clara unlocked the front doors of the Liberty Theatre. The hinges moaned in protest, as though the building itself resented being disturbed from its long sleep. She stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of damp velvet and forgotten years. Dust swirled through the light like faint memories, the ghosts of applause that once filled the space. Her footsteps echoed softly as she crossed the lobby. Cracked tiles beneath her shoes reflected dull glints of color from the faded mosaic patterns. Once, this place had been grand, a temple of light and laughter. Now, it was an empty husk echoing with time. But somehow, that emptiness comforted her. It was honest. Clara brushed her hand over the concession counter, tracing its chipped marble surface. A popcorn machine sat behind it, rusted solid, its glass cloudy with grime. When she pressed her palm against it, flakes of paint came away like ash. Everything about the theater felt fragile, not ruined, but paused, as if waiting for permission to exist again. She wandered deeper, flashlight in hand. The beam danced over torn posters, brittle film strips curling like dead leaves. The silence was heavy, but not lifeless. Every sound she made, the scrape of her boots, the whisper of her breath, seemed amplified, carried by the acoustics of a room designed for wonder. Halfway down the aisle, she stopped. A single seat stood perfectly upright among rows of collapsed ones. Its red fabric was strangely preserved, untouched by decay. She ran her fingers along the armrest, feeling the cool metal beneath the dust. For a heartbeat, she imagined someone sitting there, coat draped neatly, eyes on the silver screen, unaware that time was about to swallow everything. She shook the thought away, forcing a small smile. "You've officially lost it," she murmured to herself. Still, the sensation didn't fade. When she reached the stage, the floorboards groaned under her weight. She knelt beside the curtain, brushing away decades of grime, revealing deep crimson beneath. A sudden draft moved through the room, soft at first, then strong enough to make the curtain sway like a heartbeat. Her flashlight flickered. She frowned, tapping it lightly. It steadied. But for a brief moment, she thought she saw movement behind the curtain, a shape, a shadow. She exhaled slowly, just whined. She whispered, though her voice betrayed doubt. Behind the stage, she found a narrow hallway leading to the projection room stairwell. The plaster peeled in long, curling strips, and old movie posters clung to the walls like fragile skin. The Great Escape, Roman Holiday, The Gold Rush. Irony didn't escape her, the gold rush indeed. The staircase creaked as she ascended, dust falling like snow with every step. When she reached the top, she hesitated before the door marked projection booth. The padlock was old but broken, the latch dangling loosely as if someone had forced it long ago. She pushed the door open. The smell hit her first, a sharp blend of rust, mildew, and something chemical, like decayed film stock. Inside, sunlight filtered through narrow glass panes, cutting through the gloom in pale ribbons. The projector sat in the center like a slumbering beast, its reels tangled and corroded, the lens clouded with dust. Clara approached slowly, reverently, as though stepping into a chapel. She touched the cold metal, feeling the texture of years pressed into it. Something about the machine stirred her. It was more than a relic. It was memory made physical. On the small work table beside it, she found old film reels stacked haphazardly. Some were labeled Newsreel 1949, Local Ads, Premiere Night. Others bore no markings at all. She carefully lifted one, feeling its brittle weight. Her gaze drifted to the window that overlooked the auditorium. Through it, she could see the entire space below, a silent sea of seats, the empty stage, the fractured screen. For a moment, she imagined the projector coming alive again, flooding the room with light, sound, and life, but the illusion faded, replaced by the cold truth of dust and ruin. Then something caught her eye, a faint glint beneath the projector, like metal catching light. She crouched down and reached underneath, fingers brushing against something solid. She pulled out a small brass key, tarnished with age. Its teeth were jagged, hand-filed, not factory-made. She turned it over in her palm, reading the faint engraving on its side, Rain. Her breath hitched. J.R., the initials again, the same ones carved into the locked door she'd found days ago. The theater was speaking to her in symbols, one key at a time. She pocketed it and looked around again, scanning the walls for anything out of place. That's when she noticed the faint outline of a rectangular panel near the back corner of the booth. The edges were barely visible, hidden behind layers of peeling paint. She stepped closer, brushing the surface with her fingers. It felt hollow. Behind her, the faint echo of footsteps sounded from somewhere below. She froze. The noise came again, slower this time, deliberate. Someone was in the building. Clara killed her flashlight and stood perfectly still, heart hammering. The silence returned, thick and suffocating. After a moment, she exhaled shakily. Maybe it was just the wind again, or the building settling. Still, she couldn't shake the chill crawling up her spine. Leaving the booth door slightly ajar, she descended the stairs quietly. Her shoes crunched on scattered glass as she moved through the narrow hallway. She peeked into the lobby, empty. Only the faint hum of traffic from outside reached her. She set her flashlight on the counter and leaned against it, forcing herself to breathe. "You're fine," she muttered under her breath, "just nerves." To distract herself, she wandered toward the back office again. She began sorting through old boxes, brittle movie tickets, projector bulbs, and crumbling ledgers. That's when she found it, a stack of black and white photographs tucked inside a metal tin. They showed the theater in its prime glowing marquee, crowds dressed in evening wear, smiling ushers lined up like soldiers. And in one photo, dated July 1953, she saw him, a man in a suit, standing proudly in front of the screen. The nameplate on his jacket read, Jonathan Raines, owner. He stood beside a small group of men in military uniforms. Behind them, the stage curtain was drawn closed. Across the photo's bottom margin, written in ink, the Golden Premiere, 1953. Clara traced the words with her thumb. Her heart pounded. There it was again, the phrase she'd seen in the ledger. Operation Dawnlight, the Golden Premiere. Whatever happened that night had frozen this place in time. She leaned back in the chair, holding the photograph up to the light. Outside, the afternoon sun burned through the dusty windows, illuminating Rain's face. His expression was confident, but his eyes looked wary, as if he already knew something was coming. Clara set the photo down slowly. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass frame, caught between past and present, between ruin and discovery. For the first time, she felt the faint pulse of something larger than herself, a story whispering through the cracks, begging to be heard. She didn't yet know it, but the Liberty Theatre had just begun to open its mouth, and soon it would tell her everything. As she closed the tin and tucked it under her arm, a gust of wind rattled the front doors violently, making her flinch. The sound echoed through the vast auditorium like a warning, but instead of fear, Clara felt a strange calm. The theater wasn't scaring her anymore. It was calling her deeper. She walked back toward the darkened stage, her footsteps slow, deliberate. Somewhere above her, the projector gave a faint metallic click, though no one had touched it. And in that brief moment of silence after, she knew with haunting certainty, the Liberty was not empty. It was waiting. As the evening light dimmed, the golden dust in the air shimmered and fell. The echoes of the past stirred once more, and Clara Reese, standing in the center of that decaying palace, took her first real step into its secret. The story was breathing again. After the theaters, whispers led her to the photograph tin, and the name that kept returning like a tide, Jonathan Raines. Clara stood in the dim lobby and listened to the building breathe. The wind pressed at the glass doors. The ceiling sighed with age. The past moved like a current just beneath the floorboards. She steadied herself with a palm on the concession counter and let the hush settle, as if the Liberty preferred questions asked softly. She began with light. Windows that had been blind for years opened to the scrape of her screwdriver, releasing panes of powdered glass and a soft rush of cold air. Sunlight crept in slanted bands across the lobby tile, revealing color that had been hiding under gray, a mosaic swallow, a starburst, a ribbon of teal. She followed the light like a pilgrim. Wherever it touched, she brushed and swept, uncovering small reliquaries, a brass ticket puncher, a trembling stack of Admit 1 stubs, a nickel wedged in the crack of the cash drawer, green with age. The sound of each find was crisp in the quiet, metal on wood, paper sighing, keys chiming in her pocket with each step, the one she had found in the booth knocking like a heartbeat against the others. By noon, the smell of damp velvet and old sugar had shifted to dust and air, the way rooms do when they remember how to breathe. In the office, she set the photograph of Raines upright against the ledgers, then turned the chair to face the window so light fell full across his weary eyes. She wanted him to watch her work. She wanted him to know she was paying attention. When she finally climbed again toward the projection booth, The stairwell felt narrower, the metal railing colder. At the top, she paused with her ear to the door. Nothing answered but the faint tick of settling wood. Inside, the projector sat in its posture of sleep, lens clouded, reels knotted like a fossilized nest. The air had the mineral tang of film and rust. She moved in with a deliberate care, the way one enters a chapel, and knelt by the panel she'd traced earlier, a rectangle of wall that rang hollow when she rapped it lightly with her knuckles. She tried her fingernails first, then the flathead screwdriver. Paint flaked away in thin curls. Beneath, the seam appeared more clearly, a hairline around the shape. She slid the screwdriver into the groove and pried. A gasp of stale air pushed across her face, touched with the sweetness of old oil. The panel loosened and tilted, catching on a hidden hinge. Behind it, darkness and the suggestion of depth. She lifted her flashlight. The beam slipped into a narrow cavity, illuminating a short passage hardly wider than her shoulders and faced in concrete. Halfway down, metal gleamed. A second door, low and thick, skin of steel dulled by time. She swallowed. The air here was colder. Even sound seemed to hush itself. She approached on cautious steps, careful not to disturb the detritus, a feather, a dried spider husk, a screw that had frozen to the floor with rust. The door bore an oval plate at eye level, grimed nearly black. She wiped it with her sleeve until the letters appeared, shallow but insistent. J.R. Her throat tightened. The same knife, cut initials on the other lock, the same signature scratched into the theater's bones. She held the brass key she'd found earlier until its teeth pressed her palm, then fit it to the keyway out of instinct before she could overthink it. It slid in with a reluctant scrape, stopped, then seated fully with a small metallic breath. She didn't turn it, not yet. Her hand hovered on the cool weight. A low tremor rose up her arm as if the door were a living thing that could feel her touch. Behind her, the projector gave a soft, settling click, metal speaking to metal. She glanced back, pulse quickening, then laughed once under her breath at her own jumpiness. The laugh died quickly in the narrow passage. Sound did not want to linger here. She stepped back from the lock and forced herself to slow down. A mystery this dense did not reward rushing. The photograph, the ledger ending at Operation Dawnlight, the military men flanking Rains, the town's memory cut clean on a single night. She needed a line that connected more than the theater's secret geometry. She needed someone older than the dust. The library answered with a smell as old as paper knows how to be. The local history room was ringed with binders and brittle newsprint mounted in plastic sleeves. A librarian with hair like spun silver showed her the microfilm machine with a small, kind caution, as if she were handing Clara a device that could harm if mishandled. The reels hummed to life. Black strips of time slid under light, pages flickering, promotions for the Liberties matinees, spotlights on high school plays, ads for the diner's blue plate special. The golden premiere appeared 3 weeks out in bold type, then 2, then 1, a drumbeat promising glamour after a long post, wore grey. The week after that, the paper went quiet on the theater entirely. A new grocery ad took its place. The absence stood out like a tooth pulled clean from a smile. She widened the search and found the town columnist had written a single oblique sentence in A Notes and Notions. Sidebar: on the Monday following the premiere date, odd goings on at the Liberty after hours. Some light should be shed on what flickers in the dark. And then nothing more, as if a hand had removed the rest. Clara's fingers hovered over the machine's controls. On the next reel, an unrelated notice about federal inspectors visiting local businesses flickered by, and her spine offered a chill she could neither justify nor ignore. Light equals truth. Someone had switched something off. The historian met her in the afternoon, a man whose skin had browned to leather and whose voice carried the soft rhythm of lived years. He let her speak first. When she finished, he folded his hands like a book closing. "Jonathan Rains," he said, tasting the name. "War contracts, film shipments. He brought soldiers to town, sometimes always had a guard on the booth when he screened his private reels. Folks liked the glamour, didn't ask questions for fear of losing it." "Operation Dawnlight?" Clara asked. He shook his head once, only ever heard it in a whisper. "Came and went fast. Some said the projector showed more than movies. Some said it pointed to places you weren't supposed to see." His eyes softened. "Careful with old secrets. They carry their time with them." She thanked him, copied what she could, and left with the weight of his caution settling like dust on her coat. Outside, the sky had shifted to pewter. A hush fell across the street, the way it does before weather turns. As she drove back to the Liberty, the town seemed to lean inward, storefronts watching like lined faces peering through glass. She did not answer that look with bravado. She answered with purpose. Back in the lobby, she placed the historian's photocopies beside the ledger and the photograph, a small altar of evidence in a building that preferred offerings of silence. The light had thinned to late afternoon blue. She carried it with her up the stairs in the glow of her flashlight and the whisper of her breath. The panel gaped in the booth wall like a mouth that had forgotten how to close. She squeezed through again, the concrete brushing her shoulders. At the steel door, she let the brass key rest against the lock and thought of simple things. Ethan's last glance that morning, the way his skepticism was only fear dressed as logic. The rent due next week. The sour taste of courthouse coffee and the clean snap of the auctioneer's gavel. The word Liberty missing half its letters but refusing to fall. She turned the key. The lock did not yield so much as consider. Metal against metal gave a slow groan, a sound like ice shifting on a winter lake. The bolt slid back half, then more than caught. She eased pressure, reversed, tried again. On the third attempt it completed its journey with a decisive thunk that carried through the door and down her bones. She lifted the latch. The seal broke with a sigh that smelled of coin and oil and long, closed rooms. She did not open the door. Instead, she stood with her palm on it and let the cold of the steel climb into her skin until her breathing steadied. Not fear, not exactly, respect. The theater had bent the air around this place for 70 years. It could spare one more minute for a boundary to be acknowledged. When she stepped back, the beam of her flashlight brushed a line etched low on the surface. Not the initials. Smaller, finer, like a jeweler's hand, a sunburst engraved in a circle, rays radiating in precise measure. Dawnlight. She traced it with the tip of her finger until the pattern warmed under her touch. The door seemed to absorb the light and hold it. A draft touched her hair, a slow exhale from the opening panel behind. The projector clicked again, not mechanical this time. She was almost sure, but responsive, as if recognizing a sequence kept secret for decades. The booth window framed the auditorium in a deepening blue. The torn screen, pricked with holes like a constellation, caught the last of the day and gave it back as a pale veil. She could almost see the room full, the shimmer across lacquered hair, the rustle of programs, the soft cough of nerves held in check before a big moment. She made herself close the panel for now, settle the loose screws in a pile like coins, and descend. She found a chair mid-aisle and sat facing the screen, the way an audience member would have on the night a promise was made and quickly broken. Above her, the ceiling mural saints, caught in fading gold, watched without judgment. The room was honest about what it had been and what it had failed to finish. She rested her hands on her knees and allowed a single tear to thread down her cheek, not for grief, but for the simple relief of finding something to do that felt like it belonged to her. The sound that followed came from the lobby, a faint shuffle, then the almost inaudible click of the front door easing against its latch. She held still, listening hard enough to hear her pulse. Silence returned. The building tucked its breath back into itself. She rose and walked the aisle with care. At the threshold she discovered nothing but a thin skid of grit on the tile, like a footprint smudged by wind. The outside air smelled of rain not yet arrived. She turned the deadbolt, slid the chain, and spoke once to the empty lobby in a low voice that felt more like a vow than a defense. "I'm not going anywhere." Back in the booth she catalogued the reels with quick, precise strokes of her pen across a notebook page. Unlabeled, newsreel, local ads, premiere night. She paused at the last, the words carrying a gravity she could feel along her wrists. The projector's belts were dry, its wiring brittle as old ivy, but these things could be coaxed awake. Light remembers the way forward when given a path. She laid the brass key on the work table and lined up tools she would need tomorrow. Oil, cloth, a brush fine enough to lift dust from the lens without scratching, courage enough to thread a film with unknown consequences. The door behind the panel would remain shut until the machine of memory could show her what had demanded a lock. Truth, then threshold, light first, then the steel. As twilight seeped into the booth, the theater took on that liminal hum buildings get when day gives up its last coin of brightness. She whispered a good night without meaning to, palm grazing the projector's chassis as if reassuring a patient before surgery. Downstairs she extinguished her light and let the half-open windows breathe cool air through velvet darkness. The smell of rain drew nearer, promising a storm that would rinse the town's roofs and leave everything sharp and quiet. On her way out, she paused beneath the broken marquee and looked up at the voids where letters had once hung. The sky beyond it had the color of old pewter, and in that reflective gray she glimpsed her own outline, small, stubborn, still standing. She locked the door and listened one last time to the interior hush, not lonely now but attentive, like a room waiting for the audience to settle before the first frame flickers. Tomorrow she would clean the lens until it caught the morning, thread the reel labeled Premiere Night, and ask the projector to speak. And when light poured through the dust like a river turning gold, she would finally turn the cold steel handle behind the wall and see what the liberty had guarded with initials, whispers, and time. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. Rain had fallen through the night, washing the town clean, leaving the streets slick and glistening like mirrors. By the time Clara returned to the Liberty the next morning, fog had settled low, curling around the marquee's skeletal frame like breath. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The theater greeted her with silence, a silence that didn't feel empty anymore. It felt aware. She had spent half the night studying the photograph of Jonathan Rains, the man who seemed to haunt every corner of this building. The look in his eyes confident, yet uneasy, refused to leave her. He wasn't just an owner, he was guarding something, and now Clara couldn't stop herself from chasing it. The flashlight beam swept over the walls as she made her way toward the projection booth again. The stairs creaked beneath her, complaining in long, aching groans. In her hand she carried a can of oil, a cloth, and a notebook filled with half-legible theories, fragments of history, stitched together with desperation and curiosity. The projector loomed in the half, light like a sentry that had seen too much. Its body was rusted and cold, its lens filmed over by decades of neglect, but to Clara it wasn't a machine, it was a witness. She ran her fingers over the brass nameplate, Rains & Co., Cinema Systems. Her thumb brushed the engraved initials again, J.R., the same mark that sealed the door in the wall, the same signature echoing through time. The old reels sat stacked nearby, silent sentinels of forgotten light. Some were labeled in careful handwriting, others not at all. Premiere night, newsreel 1949, Operation Dawnlight. The words burned in her memory, whispering like prayers she didn't yet understand. She took a deep breath, sat at the old stool, and began cleaning. Each wipe of the cloth revealed the faint shimmer of glass beneath the dust. The smell of oil filled the air, sharp and metallic. Slowly, the projector began to resemble something alive again, as if light might still remember its way through it. Clara replaced the worn belt with one she'd ordered online, unsure if it would fit but hopeful. When she finally found the switch panel, she hesitated. 1,000 small thoughts fluttered through her. What if it shorts? What if the film burns? What if this is all just an illusion? But curiosity had always been stronger than fear. She flipped the switch. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the machine gave a faint hum, the hesitant sound of something waking after a very long sleep. The fan blades turned once, twice, then caught rhythm. A beam of light sputtered from the lens, scattering dust into a golden storm. Clara stepped back, breath caught in her throat. The light was faint, uneven, but alive. She felt the hairs on her arms rise. She loaded one of the reels, a small, brittle one labeled Premiere Night. The celluloid trembled in her hands like thin, fragile skin. She threaded it carefully, just as her father had once shown her in an old drive-in projector decades ago. When the reel began to spin, the first flickers appeared on the torn screen below. Grainy images, jittering ghosts, a crowd in suits and dresses, camera flashes, the glow of chandeliers, applause without sound, laughter frozen in black and white. Her eyes widened. The Liberty was alive again, if only for a moment. She watched as people filled the frame, stepping out of cars, greeting one another with champagne smiles. Then there he was, Jonathan Rains, younger, standing at the center of it all. He faced the camera directly, his expression distant, serious. In the background, a curtain rippled slightly, the same stage, curtain Clara had touched the day before. But then something shifted. The reel flickered, distorted, frames tearing in quick flashes. The image jumped to the projector room, this very room. She saw the same angle she stood in now, but from behind the lens. Men were hauling heavy crates into the corner, prying up floor panels, sealing something beneath. Her breath hitched. The image cut again, the faces of two men arguing, one pointing toward the camera, the other shaking his head. Then the footage stuttered, blinding light filled the frame, and the reel snapped, flapping wildly until the machine ground to a stop. Silence. Only the faint hiss of the motor remained, a dying heartbeat. Clara stood frozen, her pulse racing, the air heavy with static. She reached forward to stop the reel's spin, her hands trembling. What she'd just seen didn't make sense. Crates in the booth, a hidden floor. Rains himself. She sank onto the stool, staring at the projector as if it might explain itself. "What were you doing, Jonathan?" she whispered. "What did you hide here?" Her eyes flicked toward the wall, the panel she had opened, the steel door sealed with the sunburst emblem. Beneath her, she imagined the crates from the footage resting in the dark, undisturbed for 70 years. She stood, driven by something electric, part fear, part fascination. The film strip dangled from the machine, torn at its edge. She picked it up and held it toward the light. The final frame, though burned, showed a blurred image. A man's hand resting on the crate lid. Faintly visible, even through the damage, were letters stenciled in white paint. She squinted. U.S. Trias, the rest was gone. The hum of the projector dimmed to silence, leaving only her breathing and the faint patter of rain outside. The sound felt like a pulse syncing with her own, the rhythm of discovery and danger intertwining. She wrote furiously in her notebook, evidence of Rains, crates hidden behind projector wall, possible connection to government property, Confirm. Operation Dawnlight. Her handwriting trembled with adrenaline. Then came a noise faint but sharp from below, the echo of a door closing. Clara froze. Her pulse leapt to her throat. She stepped quietly to the booth window and peered down into the lobby. The golden afternoon light had dimmed. The shadows had lengthened. Through the cracked glass she saw movement, a shape near the entrance, human, slow. Her mind raced. No one else should be here. She'd locked the doors. She turned off the projector light, plunging the booth into near darkness, and crouched low. The only illumination came from the faint glow of the outside street lamps filtering through broken windows. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, they moved across the lobby tile toward the main hall. The sound of a shoe scuffing, then silence. Clara held her breath, heart hammering in her chest. Her eyes adjusted slowly enough to catch the faint outline of a figure standing below the balcony, head tilted upward. For an instant, she thought the person might be looking right at her. Then the voice came, calm, male, unfamiliar. "Beautiful place, isn't it?" She stiffened. The voice drifted up again, smooth as oil. "Shame what time does to things like this." Clara didn't move, didn't answer. The footsteps turned and began walking toward the projection stairs. Her mind screamed to run, to hide, but her body wouldn't listen. Every creak of the staircase vibrated through her ribs. Whoever he was coming closer. And when the first shadow fell across the booth door, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whoever he was, he hadn't come to admire the view. As the dim light flickered across the projector lens, the Liberty seemed to hold its breath, and Clara Reese, gripping the edge of the stool, realized that the secrets buried behind its walls were no longer hers alone. The story was changing hands. The booth door creaked under the weight of a cautious hand. Clara stepped back instinctively, the faint light from the projector beam glinting off the sweat on her forehead. The shadow paused just outside, long and deliberate, stretching across the wooden floor like a dark blade. "Don't be startled," the man said softly. His tone was calm, too calm, the kind that hid more than it revealed. "I didn't mean to intrude." Clara's pulse hammered, the theaters closed. She managed her voice low, steady only because she willed it to be. He stepped into view, middle-aged, sharply dressed, but rain-soaked from outside. His coat was tailored, his shoes far too clean for a place like this. He offered a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Closed, yes. Abandoned, not quite. "You're the new owner, I hear," she nodded slowly. "And you are?" He extended a gloved hand. "Just an archivist. Name's Leland Shaw. I collect and restore old film artifacts. When word spread about the Liberty changing hands, I thought I'd stop by. There are certain reels rumored to have been produced here, historically significant, perhaps." Clara didn't take his hand. "You heard that fast." Shaw's smile flickered, controlled. "Small town, news moves quicker than light." His gaze drifted to the projector behind her, the film strip still hanging loose. "You've already begun restoration work." "I'm just cleaning," she replied. He stepped closer to the machine, inspecting its brass components with a reverent touch. Rains & Co. model, rare, these were custom, built, you know. Jonathan Rains wasn't just an exhibitor, he was an engineer, an archivist of his own kind. "You knew him, not personally," he said, eyes fixed on the lens. "But men like him leave fingerprints everywhere, especially when they hide something worth protecting." The words sent a shiver through her. She tried to sound casual. "Hide what, exactly?" He turned then, his expression unreadable. "Gold, or secrets made of it, depends on what you believe." Clara's breath hitched. "Excuse me." Shaw smiled again, softer this time, almost pitying. "I collect stories, Miss Reese, and this theater, it's built on one." He brushed a layer of dust from the projector plate and studied the sunburst emblem etched faintly into it, the same one she'd seen on the sealed steel door. Operation Dawnlight, he murmured. A name that shouldn't exist. Funny how things that shouldn't exist always find their way back into the light. Her pulse raced. He shouldn't have known that name. She hadn't told anyone. How do you know about that? She demanded. He looked at her with that same calm, almost bored detachment. Because I've been following this trail for a long time. Longer than you've owned this place. Rains wasn't just a filmmaker. He was a courier. During the last years of the war, shipments of European gold went missing, never accounted for. Some said he helped move it. Others said he hid it. And you think it's here? His eyes glinted. I don't think. I know. He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope, placing it gently on the work table. Inside were black and white photos, grainy, old, stamped with military insignia. Crates marked U.S. Treasury, a warehouse, soldiers, a younger Rain standing beside them. Clara stared, her stomach knotting. Where did you get these? Let's just say some people have been keeping these things quiet for a reason. Shaw said, lowering his voice. You stumbled onto something you don't understand yet, and that can be dangerous. Are you threatening me? Quite the opposite, he replied smoothly. I'm offering to help. He leaned on the edge of the table, casual but calculated. Let me examine the building. If I find what I'm looking for, you'll be compensated. Handsomely. More money than this place or you will ever be worth otherwise. Clara felt anger rise, sharp and hot. I'm not selling anything. You don't even know what you have, he said quietly. There are things hidden here that should never see daylight again. He glanced toward the projector wall, the one with the hollow seam. I assume you've already found it. Her throat went dry. She didn't answer. That tiny silence was enough. His expression hardened. He nodded slowly, almost respectfully. I see. Then I'll leave you to think on it. He slid a business card across the table, its embossed letters gleaming faintly in the light. Call me before you do something reckless. Curiosity is expensive. Then he turned, descending the stairs with quiet precision. His footsteps echoed through the empty theater until the front door groaned open, then shut again with a hollow thud. Clara stood frozen. The smell of his cologne, faint and chemical, lingered in the air like an afterthought. She picked up the card. It read, Leland Shaw Film Preservation and Historical Acquisitions, a phone number, nothing else. Her hands trembled as she set it down. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The light from the booth window dimmed. For a long time, she stood staring at the projector, the machine that had just thrown open a door to the past and now, apparently, to danger. She replayed the reel's images in her mind, the crates, the hidden wall, the symbols, the flash of a hand stenciled with U.S. Trias, and now this stranger, appearing just hours after she'd seen it. Coincidence was dead. She sat down heavily, mind racing. If Shaw was right, if the theater really did hide gold, then she wasn't just restoring a building. She was sitting on something people would kill to possess. The air inside the booth felt different now, charged, hostile, alive. She turned the projector lens toward her reflection in the glass. The round, blank eye of it stared back, a silent witness to everything. Beneath the hum of the storm, she thought she could almost hear something else, a faint, rhythmic tapping from behind the steel door. She froze, listening. Tap, pause, tap, tap, like metal against metal. Her hand moved toward the door handle before she realized it. Her breath came shallow, heartbeats pounding in her ears. She pressed her palm against the cold steel. It vibrated faintly, but enough to feel. Someone or something was on the other side. She jerked back, stumbling against the table. The tapping stopped. Only silence remained. The thunder cracked outside, shaking the windows. Clara stared at the door, her pulse roaring in her ears. The steel surface reflected the faint glow of the projector lamp, and for one impossible instant, she thought she saw movement in it. A blurred shadow just behind her shoulder. She spun around, nothing. Only dust swirling in the beam of light. Her knees nearly gave out. She grabbed the chair for balance and whispered under her breath, "You're losing it, Clara. You're just tired." But deep down, she knew fatigue wasn't the cause. Something had stirred in that wall. Something that didn't belong to the past anymore. She switched off the projector, plunging the booth into darkness. The building exhaled around her, old wood settling, walls sighing. But beneath those sounds there was another rhythm now, one that matched her own heartbeat, slow, deliberate, patient. When she finally descended the stairs, she didn't look back. The Liberty felt different, not just haunted by memory, but guarded, watching, and as she stepped out into the rain, the echo of that tapping still followed her like a message she didn't yet understand. The past had spoken, and it wanted to be heard. As the storm deepened, Clara Reese realized one truth. Whatever was hidden behind that projector wall was no longer waiting to be found, it was waking up. Morning arrived, gray and brittle, the kind of light that made the world look cold even before you stepped outside. Clara had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of the real, the crates, the faces, Rain's eyes staring directly into hers across 70 years. And over it all, the echo of that man's voice lingered. Curiosity is expensive. She'd locked the theater the night before, but the memory of those soft, deliberate footsteps on the stairs refused to fade. The way Leland Shaw had known too much, moved too easily in her space. He hadn't come to appreciate history. He'd come to claim it. Now, in the pale morning, the Liberty looked different. The fog had thinned, but a film of dew glistened across its windows like sweat. She unlocked the doors with steady hands that betrayed their tremor only after the latch gave. The hinges moaned again, lower this time, like a warning she was learning to ignore. Inside, the air was thick and unmoving. She half expected to see him standing in the lobby, waiting, but there was only silence and the faint scent of his cologne still clinging to the dust. She walked through the aisles, past the empty seats, her footsteps echoing in the hollow stillness. Every shadow looked sharper, every creak louder. She tried to tell herself the fear was irrational, but instinct doesn't lie. Something had shifted since last night. The theater didn't feel abandoned anymore, it felt occupied. When she reached the projection booth, she found the envelope he had left behind, the one with the black and white photographs of Rains and those mysterious crates. She had gone through them over and over, trying to find something she'd missed, some clue, but now she noticed something new. One of the photos, the one showing the men unloading the boxes, had developed a faint crease overnight, revealing a tiny mark near the lower corner. She lifted it closer to the light, a faint symbol, a circle split by a rising sun, the same as the one engraved on the steel door. She whispered to herself, Operation Dawnlight. The name tasted foreign, dangerous, like speaking it aloud might make it real. A sound interrupted her, a knock. 3 soft raps against the front glass door below. Clara froze. The knock came again, measured, polite. Her heart raced. She leaned over the booth railing to peer down into the lobby. The fog outside blurred the figure's face, but she could make out a tall silhouette, wet in a dark coat. Leland Shaw. He was back. For a brief second, she considered pretending she wasn't there, but curiosity or defiance made her move. She descended the steps, the wooden boards creaking underfoot, every sound magnified in the silence. When she reached the door, he was already waiting with that same half-smile, polite, disarming, practiced. "Miss Reese," he greeted smoothly, tipping his hat. "I apologize for the early hour. I wanted to ensure I hadn't unsettled you last night." Clara crossed her arms, keeping the door only halfway open. "You broke into my property. I walked into an unlocked building. He corrected mildly, "But I understand your concern." His eyes flicked past her shoulder, toward the darkened theater behind her. "I simply wanted to clarify my intentions." "I think you made them pretty clear," she said. He chuckled softly, a sound that didn't reach his eyes. "You're braver than most people who inherit old secrets. Most would have already sold this place and left town. I didn't inherit it. I bought it." Even more curious, he studied her face the way one studies a riddle they've already solved. "You saw the film, didn't you?" Her chest tightened. "What film?" "The reel you played last night," he said quietly. "The one that shouldn't exist." Her breath caught. "How do you, I know?" He interrupted. "Because I've seen it before." Silence stretched thick as smoke. Clara's pulse roared in her ears. He reached into his coat again, pulling out a small velvet pouch. From it, he withdrew a tarnished coin no larger than a silver dollar, etched with the same sunburst insignia. He held it between his fingers, letting the dull morning light catch its edges. "These were made for the Dawnlight Project," he said softly, "not for commerce, not for collection, for record. A secret that bought silence." He held it out. She didn't take it. "Rains wasn't working alone," Shaw continued. "There were others. Men who moved things, art, gold, people under the pretense of preservation. But Rains grew greedy. He filmed what he wasn't supposed to.